Welcome to the Narrator Roundtable. I'm Kirt Graves. Joining me today is my good friend and fellow co-host, Lindsey Dorcus. Hi, Lindsey.
Hi, Kirt.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Fantastic.
It's a beautiful day in Chicago. I'm thrilled to be here and talk with y'all.
It's a beautiful day here in Green Bay as well. Hopefully it's a beautiful day everywhere where you are listening to this. So I'm starting today with an embarrassing story. And I'm not just saying that for dramatic effect. Like, I really went back and forth as to whether or not this was something I wanted to share with people. But here we are. So I rent an office outside my home. And I am surrounded by other small business owners, many of whom rarely, if ever, actually use their offices. They're basically mailboxes for them. So it's pretty rare that I get to interact with anyone in the halls. But I happen to be next to an entertainment lawyer. So we hit it off pretty quickly, and we share a lot of interests. In our hallway, we also have one of those like classic TV sitcom nosy neighbor types. I would say she appears out of nowhere, but her perfume ensures you always know she's coming from like a mile away. One day, I'm coming back from lunch, and I see that my lawyer friend is in the office, which is a rare sight, so I knock and I say hi. In the course of catching up, she tells me that she was approached earlier in the day by the new guy across the hall who was asking about what type of work I did because the nosy neighbor lady told him that I was making porn in there. I laughed it off. I think I said something like, I wish that would be a lot more entertaining. But inside, I was mortified. My mind raced to think of like what this woman could have witnessed or could have heard to make her think I was filming porn in my office. Like, had I been listening to a romance audiobook too loudly during an intimate scene, or did she hear the queens of Drag Race making lascivious comments when I watched an episode during a lunch break? Like, certainly she couldn't hear what I was saying inside my booth, right? And it took me a few days of being worried and feeling guilty for no reason, thank you, Catholic upbringing, to realize that she hadn't seen or heard anything. She'd probably Googled me and saw the work I actually do, recording romance, and called it porn. I am not the ultimate authority on what counts as porn, and I don't want to get into that debate today, nor do I want to imply that porn or the people who make it or consume it are bad. This is a very sex-positive space here at the Narrator Roundtable. But in the weeks and months that followed, I started to examine my work with a more critical eye. I started looking back at all my fan interactions through a new lens. Performing romance and erotica is an experience that is, most of the time, but not always, in part, intended to titillate and can create a false sense of intimacy with our audience. So how do we navigate that delicate relationship between fan and narrator, especially in the romance audiobook space? I can't think of anyone I would rather chat about that with than today's guest host. Crisden is an award-winning narrator and voice actor with over 15 years of experience, including over 500 audiobooks narrated and countless roles in video games, animation, commercials, trailers, and more. He has one of those romance voices that we've discussed on the pod before, the kind that appeals to a large demographic of readers and even some hosts of the pod. He has a very self-aware and thoughtful presence on social media that both winks at the persona he's created as a romance narrator and celebrates the many wonderful ways readers can interact with narrators. Welcome to the Narrator Roundtable, Shalan.
Thank you. Thank you, Kirt. Thank you, Lindsey. I am very pleased to be here.
We are so happy to have you and to have your perspective. We know that you don't only do romance, but you do a lot of romance. So,
I do a good amount. Oh, we're talking about work? Oh, yeah, that too. Yeah.
Yeah. The lines are already blurring.
What is real?
So, yeah, I am curious. So, like, have either of you ever felt judged or like you had to explain your work because of the work that we do in romance or erotica?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll jump in there to say yes. But most people that know me, especially at this point in my life and my career, know that I typically have a devil may care attitude about most things, and kind of this is what you get. And so there's the element of the initial introduction to new friends and faces. What do you do? Oh, I'm a narrator. Oh, what do you narrate? Smut, and how do you present it, right? So romance and erotica, I just tell people what I do and sit back and let them take it as they will. And sometimes we have to be a bit more judicious, I guess, in mixed company. We don't want to get thrown out of the ball, I guess, if we're too lewd and lascivious. But it's a very human form of art in the way that I see it. I mean, everyone experiences these very human feelings, and we as actors and entertainers cater to elements of it. So sometimes I take delight in people feeling uncomfortable. Oh, well, what does that entail? What do you do? Are there sex scenes? Yeah, there are. Do you act them out? Yes, I do. So it's there's a bit of fun, tongue in cheek, if you will, pun intended, of amusement when that happens. But earlier in my career, it was definitely I didn't tell everyone what I did. Oh, what do you do? I'm a voice actor. Mm-hmm. What have you been in? You wouldn't know some of the things, the stuff, and especially as my career branched into animation and video games. So Disney, don't listen to this, please.
I'm sure they're all just subscribed.
They're wrapped. Just this guy. So it's definitely an element at that point in time of read the room. But now this is what I do. It's a 15+ year career, and that's, for me, that's who I am, and I'm comfortable enough in saying, some folks may not like it, and then we probably wouldn't be great friends.
Good point. How about you, Lindsey?
So I'll say the two examples come to mind of people being like, "That's a weird thing you do." One is my mother, and like older people in my family and life, mostly because she's like, well, I would like to recommend some books to like my friends at church or like other people I know. And she's like, and you keep doing all these dirty books. And I don't know, like, I can't tell them. You need to do other books, Lindsey, so I can tell them to listen to those. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it just for your friends, Mom.
Lindsey's mom, if you're listening to this, I bet some of your church friends would be very interested. I bet you would
love them. No, I mean, she's very sweet. She's very supportive. She cheers me on. She gets it. But I think sometimes she's like, well, I can't. People ask me what you do, and then they ask for a book you narrated, and I don't know what to tell them sometimes. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Tell them to Google me and follow their own path. But it's very sweet. And the other one, I had an interesting interaction towards the beginning. I was talking to another actor friend of mine about a particular book I was narrating that was like, of course, some of these explicit romance books get a little wild. And it's like, I didn't even know people could do that. And like, or just very, athletic scenes or things that are kind of funny to talk about or relate to your friends and be like, wasn't that a wild scene? Wasn't that a cool scene? And this one friend was like, Lindsey, do you ever think about like people might be listening to these books you narrate and masturbating? And I just said, yeah, I kind of hope so. Like that's part of what they're for. Maybe not in the moment, hopefully you're not doing that while you're like, if you're listening while you're grocery shopping, hopefully that's not also happening. But I'm like, yeah, these are, like Kirt said at the beginning, these are meant to be titillating. They're meant to be a fantasy, whether it's something you're enjoying in your private time in the moment or like filing away for later. Like that's why we're listening to these stories. And he was so shocked, I think, that I said that. But I was like, that doesn't bother me. Like, that doesn't feel weird to me. Just like I hope when people are listening to me read a comedic book that they're laughing and enjoying themselves. And I hope during a more
right,
and I hope that during a more like upsetting scene that somebody might be crying. I know I cry and laugh and do other things while I'm listening to books that I love. Like, it's meant to make people feel something, and that is one of the many things that people can feel and do.
Well said.
You know, as a creative in any creative field, I always say that art is a language, and it's a language of human experience. So no matter what I do, you know, I'm a musician and I'm a voice talent, and I write, I dabble with writing. If someone experiences something I've created, the absolute worst thing that could ever happen is that they don't masturbate to it. No, is that there is no reaction from them, that pure apathy, right? They can hate it. They can love it. It can inspire them to have any number of human responses. And that then I feel like I've done my job. It's been successful in that it's communicated a human experience, and another human being has received that communication and acted on it however they felt appropriate based on their experience. So for me, that's just art. So I never found that to be odd. And in fact, you know, in the case of romance and erotica, yeah, I hope it's sexy time for you when you're listening to it, and that the author has done their job and woven a wonderful tale, and I'm doing my job as the narrator, bringing that tale to life and bring it to your ears. So I find that to be a badge of honor. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I find myself aligned with you guys now. I will say I wasn't always. I mean, and there's no shortage of examples in human history of times when art was demonized as porn or evil or many other things. But I do, like, I remember very specifically that first sex scene in the first book that I ever did. And like sitting in I was literally in a coat closet surrounded by coats with my little makeshift recording situation, my first book ever on ACX. And I had prepped the book, so I knew this was coming. But in that moment when I had to say those words into a microphone and I was immortalizing them for the ages, I stopped and I thought to myself, do I ever want to run for political office? No? Okay, continue. Because I really, I knew, I was like, once this goes in there, it's done. And I had no idea that book would reach, would it reach 5 people or 5 million people? I had no clue.
But also, Stacey Abrams writes romance, and she's been doing pretty well politically. So anyways, I didn't mean to cut you off, but like not a deal breaker anymore necessarily.
Well, as best we know, sex scandal does not completely dash one's political aspirations. That's a strange, crazy world we're living in right now.
Amazing. You. So I am curious, like, what are some of the experiences that we have had as narrators interacting with readers? And has it ever gotten weird, uncomfortable?
I haven't had that many direct interactions with listeners. I don't know if it's because where I'm at in my career. I don't know if it's because I do a lot of queer stuff, but I also do a lot of straight romance under my pseudonym. Or if it's because like I'm a woman and most listeners to like a lot of straight romance are like straight women, and they're just listening to me and going, that was great. I felt like she was my avatar, so I could slip into that story, and they didn't feel a need to reach out to me. I've only even gotten like a tiny handful of people reaching out to me with a little note to be like, I listened to a book you narrated and I liked it. And those are always lovely. So I don't know if it's just sort of inherent things about where I'm at in my journey, or if I've just been very lucky. But I've had very few interactions, and the ones I've had have been really positive for the most part. I know, like, in anticipating, like when we said, so it's, of course, when people listen to our work and they're like having their private time, I hope that's happening. Theoretically, I probably wouldn't want a listener to like tell me about it. Like I want them to like keep that to themselves and their experience. And I have heard stories of like, female narrators getting like comments from their co-narrator that feel like they cross a line or are like getting too in depth about like, I listened to your chapters and I really had some feelings, like, so, you know, but I'm speaking in sort of a like a theoretical, what's the word? Like a figurative space, because I don't have a ton of personal experience with it.
I've had a fair amount of interaction with fans, I'd say, based on numerous factors. You know, we can speculate. I'm at this point in my career. I'm rather well known with mild celebrity, and in particular as a cis male in this space. So not only for my hetero work, but for my queer work as well. And I kind of get everything in the diaspora that comes around me, and with the additional work that I do with video games and animation. So I have all of these different audiences who love reaching out to me. And I have a social media aversion. I always say I'm terrible at social media, and I've been trying. But I think we'll touch on that a little bit later, just in how the world has changed in general for talent and fans. And the veil is very thin now that separates the two. But I've had a good number of interactions. I mean, it's rare that a week will go by that I won't have an email or multiple DMs that most are very, very positive. And then there are those that do tend to cross a line, particularly with romance and erotica, because we're presenting that image, we're catering that. And I think some fans may then struggle with the difficulty of discerning reality from the craft and the actor. So for me, I make sure to establish very clear boundaries, because I don't want to enter into a situation where a fan suddenly thinks that I'm the special one and he's going to whisk me away to his desert retreat and have his way with me, or any of these things, where I have flirted, of course, because that's part of the appeal in some ways, but very innocently, never in a way that implies that there's anything more than a tongue-in-cheek joke related to the material. But even that can cross a line for some people. So for me, I have to exercise great caution in my interactions with fans, both virtual and through email and in person, because I do cons. I just came back from a con this weekend where you have to constantly be aware of your proximity to fans, how you interact with them, what you say. Have you touched them? Did they touch you? It's another added layer of what we do that we need to remain cognizant of. And different folks handle it in different ways. For me, I like to err on the side of caution, generally speaking. I hugged fans? Sure. Can I hug you? They ask for permission. Consent is important, kids. So that we can always choose, oh, absolutely. And I love your work, and I love when you did this and you did these specific things. And that's rewarding for me as an artist, as a talent. And it strokes the ego. I guess you feel like you're not screaming into the void, but also to know that we do impact people significantly in some cases in the way that we impact their lives. So it's trying to keep everything in an appropriate perspective where you as the talent don't become this megalomaniacal, such power, and basically create the parasocial relationship, right? There's the power imbalance that happens there. When a lot of our fans can believe that there's more to the interaction or more to the relationship and then the talent doesn't even know they exist ultimately, or uses that power imbalance to manipulate them or influence them in a way that could possibly have a dubious or negative outcome. So we have to be aware of that so that we can remain positive influences in our community and within what we do and for ourselves. And it's sort of a CYA as well, that we're very public. And what we do, the very media in which we play and dabble, deals with human sexuality and lust and kink and all of these things that in some ways are taboo and that a repressed society doesn't want to think about or deal with. And so a lot of folks don't necessarily have the emotional intelligence, the emotional maturity to deal with it because of how they were raised or what they believe. And so there are all these challenges that are sort of juxtaposed against each other when we do this. So that's my long-winded way of saying, yes, I've had various interactions with fans. The majority of them are very positive. And if they ever feel like they're crossing a line, I am always very adamant to really quickly reel it back in and establish clear boundaries with that so that it doesn't escalate.
And I'm glad you talked too about the positive interactions, because that's the majority of the interactions we have with fans. And I too have been to some conventions, and it is so lovely to meet readers who are passionate about what you do and love what you do, and do give you that affirmation and give some great hugs. I don't want to discount some great hugs. But I've also been on panels where questions have been asked that I was like, well, that's not about our work. You're now asking about our personal lives and how our personal lives might interact or intersect with the sex and kink that's being discussed in the work that we do. And we need to shut that down. But I also, like, my perspective too, as a gay man who does gay romance, I'm very publicly gay. I don't hide it. A lot of the people I'm interacting with who consume gay romance are still the audience for wider romance, and it's women. So that gray line or that blurred line doesn't really exist, because I think there's an assumed safety because my sexuality is so on my sleeve that it's like, well, this is not going anywhere, ma'am. But we can talk about the work, you know? I would like you not to ask me about my personal sex life in the context of the work. But other than that, like, we're good. We're cool. Like, we can joke, we can have fun. And the few other queer males that I've interacted with, that is where I have had to, especially in the past few months, where things have been brought up that we're not talking about, that I had to examine that dynamic that you were talking about, Sean, that, like, is this a parasocial dynamic where I had more power than I thought I did? Queer men can be very flirty. It's very normal for us to talk to one another in a way that we wouldn't, you know, like in a workspace or something like that. So yeah, it made me go back and think about my interactions with people in a new light. And I think that's a good thing. Like, that's a good thing we can take away from things that have happened, you know, if we can all learn from it.
I was going to say, I like that you both pointed out, and I agree that that I think it is the narrator's responsibility in those interactions to set and maintain boundaries. Because I you know, it certainly shouldn't be on like the fan necessarily. I mean, then if a boundary is established and they push past it, that's an issue with them. But I think, you know, it can be a lot to engage with a piece of art and to see the human in person who created it, and also those boundaries can be. I think that there are some things that probably should be maintained across the board, but I think those boundaries obviously shift and change from person to person. So I think it's smart for a narrator to figure out where their boundaries are and be willing to enforce them in those interactions.
Well said.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, I have fans who are now really good friends because either of their incessant persistence or just through our interactions and, you know, meeting people in person, and then you meet them again and you find that these are lovely people and we have a lot in common. And so it can be challenging to try to discern and wade through that, because there's so much noise in the relationship, in the sense of you are a narrator. So you're a talent, you're a celebrity, if you will. And you have many people vying for your attention and your affections, and look at me, and I love what you do. And so it does take a certain fortitude of the narrator to be able to say, okay, I can't get swept away in the tide of adoring fans or dissenters even. There's sometimes there's certainly negative feedback, and to maintain a cool composure and a level, collected head and sense of self and a sense of place with where you are, to maintain reality. Because a lot of times that quickly becomes overinflated, and the ego along with it. And that can then lead down a very difficult to navigate road with a lot of obstacles. So it puts a lot of, I won't say pressure, but a lot of thought energy. We have to devote an amount of mental bandwidth to it, whether we want to or not, because if we don't, we may fall prey to it, to be able to effectively try to navigate it as those waves come in and hit us, and we don't want to just get washed away in them. So in a sense, we have to remain strong and try to, but it's a sense of we have to know who we are. So if you know who you are, what you stand for, and what your values are, your sense of moral conduct, then that makes it a little easier. So there's some self-realization and introspection that has to happen. I mean, we don't usually think of that when you think, oh, well, I'm a narrator. I narrate books. But as soon as we operate in the public sphere, and we need to be aware that it's no longer just us in the vacuum, in the booth, sitting in our underwear narrating. I've said too much already.
Listen, it gets very hot in the summer. That's a practicality.
I live in the desert. I understand this intimately. But it's something that in recent years I've really come to face quite starkly, that I really need to consider this, it's never on the radar, right? I want to narrate this book. I want to do a good job. I want to narrate more books. I would like good reviews.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and you work on the craft, but there are other elements that are just embroiled within that are very necessary to consider as well.
Yeah, you're bringing up a lot of things that sort of lead me to my next question for us all, because you're talking about like how, especially in the last few years, you've had to think about it. You've brought up conventions, you've brought up social media. So like, with every passing year, like, readers have more and more access to us through social media and like expanding roster of book-centric conventions. So like, I'm really curious, Sean, from your perspective as someone who's been doing this for 15 years, like, how has that landscape of romance and audiobooks changed over the course of your time as a narrator?
It's changed significantly. One is in simply the size of the industry. And now the audiobook industry itself is a $2 billion industry that was unfathomable even when I started. It was still feeling more along the lines of books on tape. And now we've seen everything change just in leaps and bounds. Everybody has a smart device now. Previously, you listened to a book on tape, or you'd have to have it in your CD folio with you if you're listening to an audiobook. And now everyone has a smart device, and you can download hundreds, if not thousands, of audiobooks and have access to them or stream them. And it's so much more accessible now. And we were talking, I don't know if we were backstage or on the air when we were talking about it, but how the pandemic shifted so many things. And that is one of them, because people had more time to listen and more time to dig into audiobooks when the world was effectively shut down. So not only is the industry itself bigger, and the number of narrators are bigger, and the number of authors who are turning to audio because you've already done the work. It's an additional revenue stream. You might as well have audio for it. But the readers turn listeners who discover that there's a new way to experience their favorite stories and their favorite narratives. And that, coupled with the marriage of social media in the middle, makes, like I said previously, the veil is now very thin. That separates the fan from the talent. And no matter what it is, I mean, I think with us, and since we don't have astronomical celebrity before us right now, there are some narrators who have certainly reached that upper echelon of that. But I think most fans who want to slide on into Lady Gaga's DMs don't necessarily expect a response, or a response that doesn't come from her social media manager, where I make it a personal goal to respond to every message I get. assuming they're not something negative or completely facetious. For sometimes you get some of that, and it may take me a while. It may take me a week or two because sometimes there's a lot. But I try to do that because I made a decision that I didn't want there to be this high pedestal on which I placed myself as the talent. I wanted to be accessible. Now that's come to bite me in my ass because as a lot with social media, it's just a deluge of people and trying to keep up with it. And so there's an expectation of accessibility now that was not present 15 years ago, where someone could try to maybe find your phone number, or email was a thing then, so they could find your email and drop you an email. But now we're living in a society that's more readily interested in instant accessibility and instant action, instantaneous. We don't want to wait for anything anymore, for good or for ill. So folks expect to be able to, that you're just available. And even our professional colleagues often expect that, and the clients that we work for. But with fans, they can DM us and they'll probably get a response on any of the various social media platforms. And now they have windows into our lives based on the content that we post. So it's no longer just, if we're looking through the microcosm of the audiobook narrator, audio. It's an oral experience where there is no visual element to it. So now there can be. They can see us. They can they can see what we had for dinner that we posted. We posted the picture of this amazing meal we had, or, we visited this place, or our thoughts on something, or just us goofing off. Whatever we post for our social media content that is socially viewable, that builds a bridge for the fan to now feel that much more connected to us. And that's objectively not bad. It's not good. They can be used either way, depending on how we navigate it and how we steer that interaction. But it's a smaller world now. The mystique is sort of gone. The curtain, whoosh, is gone. You don't peek behind the curtain. There is no curtain now, right? So we are exposed. All of our tender bits are exposed as much as they can be. But even when we want some degree of anonymity, that's difficult. Google is everyone's friend, and you can find an awful lot on Google. So I think that's the biggest change now, is that everything is smaller, and there's no longer such a vast crevasse of difference between a fan and any celebrity. Everything's become much closer, much smaller.
Yeah. So, Lindsey, this is just something that I'm thinking about, just based on the conversation we've had so far. I don't want you to speak for anyone else, but I know that narrators talk to each other. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking to other femme narrators, do you hear about a lot of experiences of fan reach outs, or is this mostly a thing that cis het male romance narrators are going through?
I'm realizing. See, I was just sitting over here. I think I was either these guys are so much fancier than me, which is also true. But you're both very fancy. But and I'm or there's a silent horde, a secret horde of silently yearning lesbians that have just not talked to me, but they're out there, which may also be true. Because we do love to yearn. That is one of our hallmarks. Queer women, we love to yearn. But I will say, but yeah, I think I'm sure that there are people who deal with it more who are bigger names in the romance community. But from the very anecdotal experience, I feel I do hear this more from men, and especially cis men, way more than I do from cis women, in terms of this specific kind of fan reach outs regarding romance, and describing it as a deluge is new to me, because it's very infrequent that I will get sometimes somebody will fill out the contact form on my website, either to be send me a nice compliment. I have gotten the occasional I didn't like your narration on this book too, and I have to tell you, and it's well, okay, thanks, but those are also sporadic. But I don't get a ton of DMs. I don't get a ton of things that I have to navigate in that way. It seems like a very different world from what you two have had to experience regarding like those romance fan interactions.
I wonder if it's a deeper exploration of watching societally programmed gender roles play out and the idea of what we're expected to do and what people, and most of us are slaves to those without ever even considering it, right? So I wonder if this is yet another example of that, where it plays itself out even in our Romancelandia and audiobook world, based on gender and orientation and the boxes that maybe we haven't made for ourselves, but that society has started to carve out for us. And some people tend to simply just, all right, I'll go along with that. That's that's how I feel like I need to act. I wonder if that's an element.
Yeah, and now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder how much has to do with the fact that like you can more easily playfully objectify men, right? And I'm using the terms men and women, even though gender is a much broader spectrum here, but just because we're talking about these roles and how we see them. Because for women, objectification can be a really slippery slope and a really dangerous path, because what a lot of women experience and other non-men experience is, or people who are femme presenting, is being objectified in lots of scenarios when they don't want to be and they don't have control over that. In like a traditional workplace or another interaction or whatever, or just walking down the street or just existing in the world. That can be placed upon them at any time. And so it's a very fraught thing. And it's something that like people are really, women I think are really conscious of, or like push away or try to like build boundaries around so it doesn't happen. However, like I think that the idea of like objectification can be fun and playful and like sexy in very specific contexts where it is welcomed, where it is appropriate, where it is, I think about like the pit crew on RuPaul's Drag Race. These like very buff men who come out in little Speedos to do like fun little activities. And it's so obvious, like we barely know their names. They're obviously cast because they have a certain body type. And it's very playful. And everyone, all the queens are like, ooh, look at these attractive men. Like, and so it's this moment of like playful objectification, but I don't feel worried for those men. It's the sense that like once they put on different clothes and leave work that day and are walking down the street or taking the subway or eating a sandwich, they're going to be treated as whole human beings, because that objectification had a very specific context that they consented to, that everyone was in on the joke and everyone was like, isn't this fun? And I think that with cis men, it's easier to like, romance can be that little sandbox for people. To be like, it's fun to like objectify this man. Like, isn't this a fun thing? And that's not to say that it doesn't then have negative consequences if somebody's approaching you in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable, if somebody's ignoring your boundaries. But I think like there's more leeway. And I think especially for like a straight woman or any woman who listens to this stuff, it feels more accessible and it feels more playful to be like, it's like some fun objectification time without the baggage. Whereas when you're objectifying a woman, even in like a playful, consenting, specific context, it's really hard to pull out all that baggage and all that worry and all that like tension of like, but I don't want to bring this objectification out of this room. Like, you don't, it's hard. I can't imagine a similar scene of like women dressed in bikinis being like, isn't this fun? Because we're like, it seems to add on to the pile of what you deal with all the time, because that woman in a bikini can then put on a business suit or a sweatshirt and walk out in the world and have people treat her like she's oiled up in a bikini, like, so that's a long rambly answer for like, and it's a theory, but it's a theory as to why like you two might experience more fan interactions, because like it feels like there's a bigger sandbox to play in there.
Sure. I think that's 100% solid, that we have to understand the history and context of things, right? And everything we do sociologically, the history and context within our culture and within our civilization of objectification, of the idea as particularly for women, and how the patriarchy has ruled for eons, and there were certain expectations of what was supposed to happen. And it's much like if I decided, you know what, I'm going to put on blackface and do some blackface thing. I have pigmented skin, right? But even to approach the topic of something like blackface or yellowface or redface, any of these things, we have to look at the history of it, the context. I also believe in intent and intention. But the bigger lens is in context, historically, what has this represented? What is the perception of this historically, by and large? And how do you operate within that sphere? It was something that I was actually just talking about this past weekend at the con. I look at three things. So when you judge what someone does, how they act. So I think, okay, well, what was their intention? What did they intend to do? Was it malicious? Was it out of malice? Was it out of some sort of hatred or bigotry for something? Or were they trying to belittle someone? What is the intention? Were they just simply ignorant of the reality of something? What is the reception of it by essentially everyone else? The context, right? That historical context. And then the third element would be, okay, then what is now the reaction of the initial individual or entity? What did they do once they then understood the reception? Did they double down on it? Did they did they go on the apology tour? Did they take proactive action to show that they've learned or grown or something's changed or that they wouldn't want this to happen to someone? I don't know whatever the actions are, but I try to look at things that way when, the cancel culture, folks talk about cancel culture, which I still refer to as the consequences of your actions. When you look at it that way, it makes it at least easier for me to begin to carve through all of the bullshit and try to understand objectively, okay, what's going on? To make a more reasonable, rational approach to things. And I think that this what we're talking about falls right under that.
So let's talk a little bit about and it's fascinating to me that this has now come to a conversation also about like gender and gender norms. Because I do think all of that context matters when we talk about like, what can we do? Like we've said in this conversation, like it's up to the narrator or the person who has the power to set the boundaries. What does that mean? What are boundaries? Because the context can change. The intention can change. The person on the other end can change. And so it's hard to sit here in a podcast and say like, well, this is the rule that you should follow. And we also have to be so careful that we're not setting down rules that ultimately disadvantage other people. We can't make rules about who we are or are not willing to talk to in any given situation, because that might disadvantage somebody who would be perfectly fine to talk to. But we're so worried about the perception of interacting with somebody inappropriately that we might choose to simply not interact with them. So. Is there like do you have a 3-point model for setting boundaries, Sean? Because that would be great. I would love to hear your 3-point model for that too.
Well, I what I tend to think of in that regard is, and this is it sounds like I'm passing the buck. This is the easy answer. However, remain authentic and genuine to who you are. So in any interaction that you undertake, remain authentic and genuine to who you are. So there comes a point where we can no longer be absorbed in the energy, the massive expenditure of energy to read the room in every corner of it, right? So we all have a sense of self, right? We all have the id, the idea of who we are, what compels us, what motivates us, what we stand for, what we'll sit for, what we'll kneel for. So within all of those elements, this is why I always tell people, know thyself. You must come back to understanding who you are. This is a great way to have a perfect compass and barometer for how you should act. And how you should behave and the ethics and the morality with which you subscribe to. And that's not me telling people, be good. What is good? Be bad. What is bad? All of these things are relative terms. Be authentic and genuine to who you are. Understand who you are. That will help to guide you in these situations. Now, if your intention is to simply, I'm going to be me, okay. Ultimately, it will be received in particular ways by particular groups and entities. That's just the way it is. It doesn't matter if you were on your way to sainthood. It's just, you can't please all the people all the time. So be who you are. Cut through the BS and say, look, I'm not trying to cater to everyone. I'm trying to cater to my higher sense of self, who I've constructed myself to be in this world. For me personally, I typically try to be altruistic. I try to be empathetic and understand the needs of others and meet people where they are, because that fulfills me. I believe I want to try to put more compassion and empathy and understanding out into the world. Rather than tearing things down and destroying things, I want to build things up and build bridges, etc. Yada, yada. Sounds great. Sunshine and rainbows. So everyone else, I feel, should spend time to understand who they are. And if you're a person who hates other people, or you despise this religion or that country, or it's not for me to say. It's for you to say as an individual, and you understand who you are and the things that you stand for and that motivate you and where you are, and stick to that. Because one, you'll quickly tell people who you are, and they can then choose to deal with you or not based on those things. And two, you can feel good knowing that you basically were true to yourself, to whatever you believed. So that's something I always believed, and I always believe people should be true to themselves with whatever that may entail. That way we have real people. Authenticity. I was, again, this past weekend, I was talking to an up-and-coming actor who was saying, yeah, I'm trying to figure out, I said, just focus on authenticity. And you're the only you. And know who you are, so that you can then bring that and amplify that with whatever it is. You may be a dick. You know, you could be a total jerk. Be a jerk. That's who you are. Okay.
Jeez, you're calling me out on the podcast here, Sean.
It's heavy, man. It's so heavy, dude. Yeah. But when I would have friends, or even my own relationships growing up, and even now, I have 3 rules for relationships. There's this triumvirate thing going on for me. But, you know, whenever friends would have trouble, I say, well, you know, you see people for who they are, not for who you want them to be. Don't make them your project. Don't look at someone as, oh, well, I can fix them. They're showing you who they are. You don't need to romanticize it. You don't need to make it anything fancy. But I try to look at any interaction I have in 3 ways. One is always the management of expectations. This is what you're going to get. Like when people meet me, like, there's no bullshit. This is all right. This is what it is. There's the management of expectations is always very, 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 very important for me. Then there is the idea of a baseline of kindness. That's a choice that I have to say, I believe in interacting with human beings at a baseline of having respect and kindness for each other until they demonstrate that gets thrown out the window. But that's how I typically approach every situation is let's be kind to each other first before we start the scorched earth theory. And then it's simply an idea of open communication. Just communicate. If you're going to be a jerk, let me know. That also helps to manage expectations. If you don't feel good about something, let me know. If you feel good about something, let me know. So I try to also do the same things. And it helps to simplify what is increasingly becoming a very complex world in our interactions with each other and really our perceptions of ourselves and who we are and where we fit in this ever-changing, growing, complex world. So I try to use those 3. It's always 3. See, you were right, Kirt. See, take that. That I look at with how I try to interact with people and myself and everything, and an expectation of kindness even with myself. You know, Kirt and I were just talking before we began about our schedules and the obstacles that we find in remaining relevant, remaining productive, feeling that we are accomplishing what we need to, especially in relative comparison to our peers. And I often beat myself up over, I'm not doing enough. I need to do more. And I haven't done this, and I have to do all that. And I can sometimes forget to be kind to myself. So coming back to those general ideas and managing my own expectations, I can only do what I can do. So to understand that, and then to openly communicate with myself that that is the way it is. And sometimes I do want to take a nap, and it's okay. So all of those things. And that's a really long-winded, super long answer.
No, but so good and so wise.
I was just going to say, like, the concept of like, be authentic to yourself sounds simple, but I think it's the hardest thing we have to do as actors, as people who are asked so often to brand ourselves, to create personas, to live up to other people's expectations. And it comes across in so many points of what we do in our industry. I mean, an audition is such a hard thing to approach with authenticity when you think you know what the other person wants. Mm-hmm. When the goal is suddenly to meet someone else's expectations or what you think are their expectations. And that's another time when just be authentic to who you are. And if it's right, it'll work. But also, if you're authentic to who you are and you're not trying to meet somebody else's or live in a persona that someone else expects from you, that's really going to help you with a fan interaction to not lean into what they might want you to be. And I think that way danger lies. And to just be yourself and to be authentic and honest about who you are and your life and what you are expecting out of an interaction with another human being. I mean, like I said, it's not easy. It sounds simple. It's not. But I think there's a lot of great wisdom in that approach.
I agree. Yeah. And I think it's a good reminder to like continue doing the internal work to figure out not just who you are, but also like you said, what you believe, what you stand for, what is important to you, all of those things. Because then, like you said, you have to worry less about like, these are my boundaries. These are my, like a list of rules. And more as a mutable thing, as something that can shift and change as the context shifts and changes, because you have that sort of, the immutable part is like the core of who you are and what you believe in that moment and what is important to you. And that can change over time too, goodness knows. But, it's a complicated world. But I love that approach so much, of approaching every interaction of like, we're two humans talking. I know who I am and what I'm about. And like, I'm sitting in that, and I'm treating this interaction, I'm treating this other person with respect and dignity and kindness and, and moving from that baseline.
It's challenging to do, like Kirt said. But it's also important to remember that it is not carved in stone. So a good friend of mine once gave me this saying, and I use it all the time, that my opinions are temporary and they expire with the option to renew. In the face of new information, changing circumstances, we can always reevaluate. Mm-hmm. So even as individuals and who we are, and if you've done all of that internal work and you have this great conceptualization of who you are and an understanding of who you are, that understanding should also include that person will change. Mm-hmm. You will evolve. You will we're in a constant, everything changes. Everything is temporary. Nothing lasts forever. Even our sense of self and who we are. So today I may love apple pie with ice cream. Tomorrow it might be cake. I don't know. Right. So I have to be open to being able to embrace change and accept it. There's a level of acceptance that we need to go through, and realization. So just know that things are temporary. So you don't have to cling tenaciously to everything. It's malleable, mm-hmm. But just know a sense of when it's changing. So it's not suddenly this surprise, or you thought this was a boundary and now you've exceeded it or never reached it. and you're not sure why. That's more of the work of trying to understand how we fit in this world with ourselves and all of the extrinsic components. So that's always an important part to put, that it's not one and done. It constantly evolves.
You know, I feel like I entered this conversation just wanting to have a better sense of like how to interact with readers and fans. And I'm leaving the conversation with a better idea of how to interact with everyone in the world. So we have exceeded expectations. I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much, Sean, for joining us at the Narrator Roundtable. I really appreciate you're taking the time and all of your insights. It really was a great match of like topic and guest host. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you for joining us at the Narrator Roundtable. If you want to join the conversation, find us on social media or visit our website, narratorroundtable.com, to submit a question or topic of discussion for a future episode. What's on your mind? We want to talk about it. The Narrator Roundtable is produced and hosted by André Santana, Deanna Anthony, Gail Shalan, Kirt Graves, and Lindsey Dorcus. All copyrighted material is shared with permission. Music and sound effects are licensed through Storyblocks Audio. All opinions shared are those of the individuals and do not reflect the positions or policies of any company or organization with which they happen to be associated.